Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be here. So I've been invited to speak about the larger vision of community wellness and how it contributes to wellness in the lives of families and individuals whom we serve. And I'm just checking to see whether my slides are visible or whether I can do it through share screen. Let's see if that will work. Could someone let me know if the slides are visible to you?
The slides are up.
Wonderful. So a few years into my work, I was at a wellness center and an old timer came up to me. He was an old school cowboy. He had the battered hat and the battered boots, the jeans and the shirts with the clips. And he came in to visit with me there and leaned back in his chair and looked up at me from under his hat and said, "You know what my grandfather taught me?" And I said, no, please tell me, what did your grandfather teach you?" He looked at me and said, "Never trust a white man." And then he grinned to see what I would do. And my response was this one: "Your grandfather is brilliant. Never trust a white man because he's white. Trust him if he's safe and if he's useful." How many white men have stood at the front of a room or sat down with folks and made a terrible mess of their lives? We're going to be exploring 3 different approaches and steps towards wellness. The first is going to be a post-colonial vision of what the problem is, and that's where we're starting now. Whenever I work in community, I begin with strengths. Whenever I work with clients, I begin with strengths. And strengths, I've been told by so many elders, comes from traditional values. They guide us and tell us who we are, how we're meant to live, and what's important. So when I do the work, these are the values that usually come forward. And I'm going to ask you to consider right now, looking at these values that have been identified in many Indigenous communities, which of these resonate for you today? Choose 4 of them. Is it care or respect? Is it gratitude? Is it humility? An elder once told me, talking about these values like you do, it doesn't mean anything. And I was really shocked. I said, "What do you mean it doesn't mean anything?" And he said, "Well, it doesn't matter if you know the values. The question is, do you live them?" So I'm going to ask you to consider, in the last week, in your work, how have you lived your values? One definition of wellness that I use in the community is living your values. People who identify as mentally ill tend to struggle to live their values. People who identify as being trapped in misery tend to identify as not living their values. And simply by living their values, so much of those symptoms diminish. One of the definitions of wellness is living your values. And yet people are not doing that. Many people are not living their values. And that's where we have problems in communities, such as violence, the use of substances and behaviors to cope, suicide, conflict between families. None of these come from traditional values. They don't come from the land and the water. They come from colonization. So the post-colonial stance that I'm going to be introducing here or sharing with you, if you're already familiar with it, is not that colonization is over, because it's not. It's that the problems we see in community must be understood as an expression of colonial violation, rather than strictly an individual wound, an individual problem or illness. The problems we see in community do not come from the community. In terms of colonization, there are 3 responses that we often get when we serve folks who are experiencing it. The first response is, how can you be the cure when you're the disease? It's a hostile response, which is quite understandable under the circumstances. The second response is, oh, great, the expert from the outside has come to save us, help us. These are the people who believed what they heard in the Indian school system, which said that Indigenous people know nothing and the outsiders know everything. And they're left in a state of helpless longing to be rescued by the system that wounded them. The third response is post-colonial. There are three questions that I seek in those with whom I work that are post-colonial questions. The first one is, who are you? And what role do you really think you have with us? The second is, are you safe? And the third is, are you useful? These are the questions that matter. Because if we assume problems come from within the community, then we may actually make colonization worse by blaming the victim. Only by looking at the colonial wound can we actually stop colonization's impacts, and that is where wellness comes from. The reclaiming of ways of living and being in the world that are not colonial. So I'm going to introduce you very briefly to a 4 waves of colonization model. This model is meant to follow the epidemics which did terrible harm in British Columbia. Up to 90% of communities died, 90% in the epidemics, some of which were done on purpose through poison blankets, and many were accidental. After that, though, there were 4 intentional colonial waves, and we're just going to review them briefly. The first one was the creation of reserves, settlements, or villages, and relocations away from traditional territories, or shrinking traditional territories into basically municipal environments. And when these relocations took place, so much was stolen. I used to say so much was lost until I was told fairly clearly that we are not a careless people. We did not lose our land. We did not lose our children or our way of life. They were stolen from us. And so now I always speak in the language of theft. And we can see what is stolen. Identity is stolen because for Indigenous folk, identity is the land. Economy was stolen because a way of life is stolen, and then food is stolen. Diabetes is not actually a health problem. It's a colonial violation played out on the body from a theft of economy, traditional foods, ways of living, all taken away. And the result is type 2 diabetes at the levels that we see. The theft of rights and criminalization of culture, where it was against the law to practice ceremony, and traditional governance chosen by merit or inheritance was replaced with a model based on the 17th century London, England, municipal model. The theft of rights and led to nations being treated like municipalities in terms of the federal government having power over these smaller communities and setting the limits of what's possible and not possible. With the creation of reserves, another key issue emerged, and that is the conflict between families. Families were never meant to live in one place. They were meant to live in their own territory, come together for ceremony, come together for marriage, and then separate again. Now they're living in a single pressure cooker, and so many of the conflict between families are the result of colonial oppression. The next wave is very, very painful, so please protect your heart. It's the Indian school system, whether it's day school or residential school or the hospital-based schools. And we all know how much was stolen there. The thing is, from a post-colonial perspective, the Indian school system has never changed. There are more children in foster care than ever went to residential school. What we have now is social and mental health services as the 4th wave of colonization. And this means that the problems are going to carry on. We now have people living with non-Indigenous foster parents and going to mainstream schools. This is just a decentralization of the Indian school system. Now, I want to be very, very clear. There are magnificent foster parents, magnificent social workers, magnificent counselors and doctors and educators and nurses and others. And there are terrible social workers, terrible foster parents, terrible counselors, terrible doctors, nurses, and others. and many that are good enough. I'm not speaking about the individual members of the various services. I'm speaking about the overarching system that still says, you are sick and dysfunctional, you need to be fixed. We could ask, the way we do this is through rhetorical maneuver. Three steps, and these are post-colonial feminist words, so bear with me, they're pretty ugly words. The first step is we individualize. We say, you have a problem, rather than saying you're responding naturally to all of the wounds that have happened to your community, to your family, and to you. So we say, no, it's about you. And then we say, you are sick. You're pathological. You are an addict. You're depressed. You have an anxiety disorder. You're bipolar. You are borderline personality disorder. We create sickness labels to describe natural responses to colonial violation. I have never met anybody who said, I started drinking at 12 because I wanted to become an alcoholic. They don't say that. What they're doing is medicating terrible pain. But by identifying a person as having a disease, a sickness, we take away their agency in their attempts to solve the wound of colonization, even though the solution can be terrible. And finally, or put another way, if you live on a reserve and you don't experience depression, you're either incredibly resilient or perhaps quite out of your mind. Because when you look at the wounds on reserve, despite the wonderful families that are there, despite the programs that are exciting, despite the changes that are happening, there is still a whole lot to be depressed about. And yet we'll label somebody as sick instead of responding naturally to the situation. And finally, we medicalize it and identify it as having a biological source. One might ask, who actually has residential school syndrome? This was a diagnosis proposed by Charles Brassfield for the DSM-4. And he suggested it would be a specialized form of PTSD. Roland Christian replied, actually, who is sick? The survivors of a school that were intended for genocide, or the churches and government that ran them for all that time? Who is actually sick, but who will get labeled and possibly medicated? Attention deficit hyperactive disorder should probably be called attention surplus disorder, because people who struggle with this so-called label, they have too much attention, not too little. However, when I've worked in communities and I ask elders who are great hunters, what makes you a great hunter? And they describe what hunting is for them. The behavior they describe in a school would be called ADHD. In one context, it's a gift. Another context, it's labeled a disorder. Eduardo Duran has pointed out that the colonizer has taken traditional naming ceremonies away from families and replaced it with diagnosis. Instead of being named for the gifts you carry, you're now named as being sick and dysfunctional. I want to speak very briefly about trauma, bringing a trauma-informed approach to a post-colonial vision, recognizing that trauma is a psychological consequence of colonization, just as the other impacts that are noted there on the slide. A trauma braid is a way of making sense of where trauma emerges from colonization. If you consider trauma an extension of the colonial wound, then you see the instinct, flight, freeze, and fight, as a survival instinct in the face of the wound. However, if you are in a state of flight and you're in a reserve or other colonized environment where you experience ongoing threats and pressures, the flight instinct gets triggered so often, you end up experiencing what people label as anxiety. The freeze instinct, when it's over-triggered, leads to what people will label depression. And the fight instinct, of course, if it's over-triggered, leads to rage. What are the three most common so-called mental health problems in Indigenous communities? Anxiety, depression, and rage. They are trauma reactions. They are not mental illness. There is no mental health crisis in Indigenous communities. There is a colonization crisis in Indigenous communities. With ongoing colonization, in the face of these terrible experiences, you have so-called addiction, which is medicating the anxiety with heroin or alcohol, medicating the depression with crack or cocaine, medicating the rage. It is not a disease of addiction. It is a solution to the trauma reactions created by colonial violation. In the same way, we can understand that suicide, when it's tied to depression, about 50% of the time, it's not depression that causes suicide. It's that when people are staying absolutely still and freeze, so much like a camouflaged animal in the face of a bear, they stay so still, they become depressed in order to stay still, and that still doesn't relieve the pain. Suicide becomes an option. And finally, violence, lateral violence, domestic violence, violence towards children, common assaults. When it's tied to rage, you can see it's an extension of the trauma braid. It's a result of colonial violation, played out on the heart, mind, body, and spirit of community members. Think about someone you know who's indigenous with serious personal problems. They aren't born that way. Consider the family problems that led to it. Family problems such as poverty, abuse or neglect, chaos within the family. And families aren't born that way. The community problems, the conflict between families, the corruption and governance created by the voting system, the accessibility of alcohol and drugs, the secrets that are kept, the internalized oppression. And you can see the link to colonization. If you can see the chain, then we're not talking about a mental health crisis, we're talking about a colonization crisis. This is the post-colonial viewpoint. Our job, therefore, is what this sign tells us to do, to stop colonization. This is a sign I saw in Dryden, Ontario, and I couldn't believe it. I asked the person driving me, please stop the van. I need to take a picture of the sign. Stop and detour. That's what's required in the face of the colonization that is everywhere and not even seen. So there is a cure for colonization. There is good news, and this is the step 2 of our conversation. And the cure comes from culture. I would love to give you the steps by which this model emerges, but because of our time, I'm going to just give you a very brief overview of the end product of a discussion. In the work that I've done, in the teachings I've received, and I've been asked to please pass on, I've gathered a model, and it's just a model. That's all it is, something that's made up of 4 roots and branches of wellness in the Indigenous families, individuals, and communities with whom I work. Caring connection, that feeling that you belong and you are connected. Respectful empowerment, experiencing respect, which means that people think that your voice is worth hearing and that you have capacity to offer gifts to those around you. And empowerment piece means being capable in the face of your life to live well. Respectful empowerment together is living well and being seen as somebody worthy of living well by those around you. Contributing purpose, contributing to the community in a way and your family that gives you a sense of purpose. And finally, living in wisdom, guided by cultural teachings, traditions, stories on the one hand, and the spiritual guide within us, however we describe that and define it. These 4 branches, caring connection, respectful empowerment, contributing purpose, and cultural and spiritual wisdom, are the foundations of so much wellness. And I'll give you an example. We know that senior citizens, non-Indigenous old people, especially men, their suicide rate skyrockets over the age of 60. It doubles and then doubles again through the decades. Extremely high. But up until a few years ago, for elders, the suicide rate went down just as fast. The older an elder became, the less likely suicide would take place, versus the opposite for senior citizens who are non-Indigenous. So the question that we ask is, why is it that elders have a low suicide rate traditionally and seniors have a high one? And the answer is very clear. Elders receive caring connection, whereas seniors tend to be isolated. Elders are respected. They have a voice in the community. I mean, think about it. When you look at, say, People magazine, how often do you see a senior on the cover? Almost never, unless they just died, in which case the message is the only good senior is a dead one. But for covers of Indigenous publications, you regularly see elders and children on the covers. They have a role, they're respected. There are interviews with elders, not just Miley Cyrus as in People magazine, but actual elders in the Indigenous publications. Contributing purpose. Elders have a role. Seniors, they may be sitting on committees, they may be offering prayers, they may be being grandparents or great-grandparents, they may be offering teachings. Seniors retire, they leave and they're gone, meaning we don't need you. And if you can be a snowbird, go away for 2 or 3 or 4 months if you want. Head down to Florida or Mexico, wherever you can afford to go. When I work in Indigenous communities and I say, do you know what a snowbird is? The answer is, no, what are you talking about? And I say, what would you feel if the elders were to leave for 3 or 4 months in the winter? And they burst out laughing. They couldn't live without the elders. And finally, the elders are seen as the keepers of culture and spirit. They're showing us how to live in a good way, whereas seniors are just seen as old-fashioned. Now consider the youth who are struggling with suicide, crime, with substance and other behavioral issues. They feel that nobody cares about them. They have not enough caring connection. They feel like there's no opportunity to be good at anything. They're told, go to school or shut up. And if you're not good at the school skills, we want nothing to do with you. They have no role. If they drop out of school, they do nothing. They're told that the community does not need them. And many of them are disconnected from any cultural or spiritual teachings. The end result is a high suicide rate, high levels of violence, and substance problems. The elders show us how to live well, and the way we treat elders shows us how we should treat everyone. This is very relevant when it comes to a prevention program. If you offer a prevention program and you don't embrace all 4 branches of wellness, it's likely not to work. I'll give an example. About 15 years ago, I went to a diabetes prevention workshop offered by a medical professional in a very isolated community on an island off the northwest coast of BC. It was the kind of island you get to by seaplane or by a ferry twice a week. So it's a very isolated environment. And the presenter talked about the symptoms of diabetes and how you should eat better, and kind of threatened that people are probably all going to get very sick because they're not eating well around here, and gave a lecture about diabetes. And you should have seen the faces on the people there. They left in a state of utter misery and helplessness. At the end of the presentation, the presenter said, and you know what you really should eat around here? And this was 15 years ago. You should eat more kale. Now, I didn't even know what kale was at that point 15 years ago. And it certainly wasn't for sale in the tiny little shop in the community where they sold some groceries. Instead, contemporary diabetes prevention programming, brings the cooks in the community together in caring connection with each other. And they go to the community kitchen and they cook a meal, which is empowerment, made of food purchased at the local grocery store, a healthy diabetes preventing food. They then talk about diabetes and the symptoms and foods and exercise while they're cooking. And then they ask the cooks to bring the food home to their families. And if the family's like eating it, then they'll say, we'll have that every week. And now you got diabetes prevention because there's contributing purpose. You're not just passively getting information, you're doing something with it. As they used to say, knowledge transfer does not equal knowledge implementation. And of course, culturally, it's very appropriate for those who are the food managers to take care of the health of the community. This is when it's done right. I want to break this down just a little bit in the few minutes we have. We'll look at the worthwhile life and self-worth, the 2 parts of the top and bottom. A worthwhile life is being of value to the world. It makes you feel like you have a reason to be there. It is the antidote to colonization. When you think about it, residential schools were designed to take a worthwhile life away from the communities in order to create a cheap labor in the cities and other places, in the farms and the mines. A worthwhile life is based on two foundations: cultural and spiritual wisdom, and having a contributing purpose. I contribute to the world in a way that is rooted in wisdom. That is a worthwhile life. A group of elders and organizers are developing a new wellness center. It's going to be set up probably in about a year and a half. And it's very different than the models based on the 12-step disease model or the medical model. The message is you come here thinking that you are an addict or alcoholic and you're going to leave walking the elder's path. So often when I work in a wellness center, I'll say, so you talk about wanting to walk the red road, to live a good life. The red road is a combination of sobriety and culture together from the Wellbriety movement. And I'll say, tell me, what does it look like to walk the red road? They say, we won't drink, we won't drug. I said, I know what you're not doing. What's it look like to walk the red road? They say, well, we won't drink or we won't drug. I said, I know that you're not drinking or drugging, but what does it look like? And they say, we have no idea. We spend so much trying to get rid of the problem, we forget what wellness is about, which is living in a good way, which is walking the path that will lead you to become the elder the community so desperately needs you to be. Contributing purpose comes from three roles, the way I organize it, and there's so many ways to make sense of it. One of them is to be a protector. That's to be a nurturer, a healer, and to offer love and protection. The second is to be a provider, and that is to be to provide food and shelter, entertainment or ceremony, and finally to teach. What's so interesting is that so many of the young people, especially, who are getting into trouble are actually trying to do culture, but nobody's showing them how to do it right. They're getting into fights and beating people up because they actually want to be warriors. They want to be protectors. That's one of the things I forgot to mention. Sorry, the warrior is a protector too. They want to be warriors, but they're not doing it on the elder's path. They're doing it in chaos. Or they're sitting in a circle and passing around a joint. That's actually ceremony, but it's not done right because marijuana is not a medicine that belongs here. But the goal of the youth is to do ceremony. They often even do a talking circle, but a talking circle when you're stoned doesn't have the same value as a talking circle when you're not. And so they're doing it incorrectly because no one's showing them how to do it on the elder's path. But they in fact are far more cultural than people think. So take a moment to think in your work. How have you been a protector, a provider, or a teacher? Unfortunately, a group who is really good at doing this, offering this, are gangs. Gangs are spectacular at this. They offer caring connection. When I work with folks in gangs, they say, we're not a gang, we're a family. You call us a gang. And if they're getting their family needs met in a gang, you know where they're not getting their family needs met. Which makes us stop and wonder, why do we do gang prevention in schools when in fact it's the families that are struggling? The schools don't have a gang problem, the families have a gang problem because they're not offering the caring connection that young people are seeking in gangs. In gangs, you definitely have respectful empowerment. You have, you're either good at what you do or you're dead, in jail, or kicked out as a wannabe. And in gangs, everybody has contributing purpose. You have a job to do, whether you're a dealer or an enforcer or whatever it happens to be. And finally, gangs have culture. They do. But they lack the spiritual foundation, the moral compass that produces wisdom. And that's the edge that we'll always have over gangs. We have the edge of a deep knowledge by everyone I work with who are gang members that what they're doing ultimately is wrong. Once you get past the excuses, they'll recognize this is not the way I want to live my life. So that's a discussion of a worthwhile life. We're now going to go to the bottom half and look at the self-worth model very quickly here. Self-worth means valuing ourselves. It's what allows us to live up to a worthwhile life. People who know what it looks like to be a good parent is one thing, but to actually have the feeling that you have the ability to do it, that's the empowerment. And the support to accomplish it, that's the connection. They often don't. And so you need self-worth to be able to accomplish that. It protects us from violence, addiction, and suicide. If we feel valuable, we feel safe. If we feel valuable, we don't need substances to run our lives. We can run our lives. And suicide is something you only think about when your self-worth goes down to zero. Self-worth is different from arrogance. People who are arrogant say, I'm more valuable than you are. It's compensation for low self-worth. When self-worth goes down, you either have despair on the one side or arrogance on the other. Self-worth says, I'm valuable, but not more valuable than anyone else. In Indigenous language, I was told in Cree, self-worth is defined as pride and humility together, which I think is a beautiful definition. Self-worth protects us through connection, that feeling that we're loved and we belong, that who we are matters. And empowerment, the feeling that we're in control of our life and valuable for who we are and what we can do. If we have connection and empowerment, we have self-worth. Think about the clients you're concerned about. They may long for connection. If only I had a partner, if only my parents accepted me, if only a person hadn't passed away who I need so much. Or they may be struggling in terms of empowerment. If only I had more money. If only I had higher status. If only I was better at sports, or I didn't struggle with my problems. Sources of connection and empowerment, I don't have time to go into it, but this is just a chance to view them. That's the good news. Here comes a brief note about the bad news. The bad news is many people get self-worth in an unhealthy way. People don't go to the bar because it's cheap to drink there. They go there because people recognize them and they have a social connection. People don't use drugs and alcohol because they just love it and it's fun, because those people can actually stop. People are using it to get empowerment over their pain. I always share with folks, don't stop drinking. It's a terrible idea because that could be the one thing keeping you alive. And in an abusive relationship, as abusive as it is, that one relationship might be their main source of love. I never tell people to stop. One of the things I will say, though, when I go into communities is, when I go into the treatment centers, forgive me, is that sobriety is easy. You know, people talk about sobriety being hard. I say, that's ridiculous. Sobriety is a snap, at which point everybody there wants to kill me, because after all, they're there because they've been out of control with their substance use. And I'll say, I'll prove it to you. How long have you been here? And they say, well, I don't know, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. I always go after people are detox, so I go usually in the 3rd week. And how's the food and the staff and your brothers and sisters? Oh, food's fine. The staff are preachy, but they're nice. Our brothers and sisters were cool. Said, you're doing all right? I said, yeah. And guess what? Every one of you is sober. After 2.5 weeks, you're all clean and sober. It's not that hard. What's hard is Friday night when all your friends are using and you're white knuckling it on your own. That's hard. What's hard is all of the trauma pain coming up and you're not being able to medicate it with substances. That's hard. Sobriety isn't hard. It's the empowerment and connection that substances offer us that are the problem. So please don't stop, because if you take away self-worth, that could lead to suicide. Instead, replace it with something better. For example, something that we know doesn't work are anti-bullying campaigns. You've probably seen them. Don't bully. No bullies in our school. No bullies here. They don't work. For the same reason, if you tell a 2-year-old, don't draw on the wall, what will they do immediately? They'll draw on the wall. If I tell you, don't think of an elephant, I know you're already thinking of elephants. And if I say to somebody, don't bully, no bullying here, all they can think about is bullying. Stopping the behavior doesn't work. It doesn't address what the behavior is for. Instead, we need to replace it with something better. Replace bullying with training with people in school to be mentors for other people at school, for the younger ones. Now they're getting their empowerment by being a mentor instead of by bullying. They're getting connection with their peer mentors and with the younger folk. And then you're replacing the problem with a solution. This brings us to the last part of our conversation. The community is the medicine. The community has always provided wellness right up until colonization took away the infrastructure intentionally. So how can we support communities to reclaim their wellness? We have to step out of the box of colonization and into the circle of the community. Boxes like the Indian school system, boxes like the various ministries that set the protocols and the policies for any community intervention. There's 3 steps we're going to review briefly here. The first one is, quite simply, stop talking about problems. The more you talk about problems, the more of an expert you are at problems. It never ceases to amaze me how people will come and speak to me about depression and think they'll feel better instead of more depressed. But if we're talking about the problem, we get lost in it. So, first step, I'll go for an example from community agencies or a community meeting, let's say around suicide prevention in a community meeting. People say, what's the problem here with suicide? What has to change? And a few people will speak beautifully. And then about 20 minutes into the session, you'll find people start pointing fingers, say, if that family would just change, or if the band council would do their job, or if the health center would just do what it's supposed to do, I don't know what they're doing, sitting on their backside. Finger pointing happens and it gets ugly real fast because they're talking about their pain of the problem. When I'm engaged in doing community organizing around the issue of, say, youth suicide, these are the questions that will be asked in a community meeting. What would this community look like if there were no more suicide here? What would be different? What steps do we have to take to get there? And then finally, every person there's 50 people will speak, and they'll say something they're committing to do to take the first step to create the change that will lead to the community. No finger pointing. It's about each person reclaiming their role as medicine for the community. In counseling, I used to ask clients, so what brings you here? Or what are your primary concerns? The same are on intake forms. And at that moment, I'm creating a sick client because they know that they're supposed to say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm having conflict with my partner, I'm struggling with violence, whatever it happens to be. And so we create a conversation where they're seen immediately as being pathological. The approach I'm taking instead these days is this. What is your goal in coming to see me? So we're visioning wellness. How will you know when you've accomplished your goal? And finally, what resources do you need? How can I support you? And what to find the resources so you can achieve your goal? You may look at the past, but only if it's an obstacle to the future. And this is what it looks like when I'm working with a client. This is a 24-year-old I've worked with. I don't talk about the problems, we focus on the opportunities. The second step is to no longer individualize, because that's colonial. Instead, we're going to look at everyone as an interconnected whole. This is who we are. Imagine yourself surrounded by your family, all the individuals you know by name and by face, community agencies, programs, services, who members may change, but they remain the same, whether it's a support group or a school or a hospital. Then there's outside community. That includes the internet and all of the media, but also communities near you and far that are outside of your community. And finally, nature and spirit holding everything. This is who we are. When you make that list, though all of that is inside you as much as outside of you. The whole idea that we're a separate individual is a very recent Western fantasy. An Indigenous man once said to me when we were working together, he said, you know what, Darien, all this talk you have about community this and community that, seriously, you're born alone, he said, and you die alone. And I remember turning to him and saying, I'm sorry, are you a miracle? Wasn't there a woman around when you were born? Most people have a woman nearby when they're born. No one is born alone. It is impossible. That means we're born into relationship. and we live in relationship for our entire lives. An example, the whole community becomes a wellness resource if we are all interconnected in this way. And I'll share an example. I'm just going back to the slide. I have worked in a community where there was a devastating series of youth suicides, not just attempts, but a series of deaths. And the community was in a state of acute crisis. They were losing their youth. The thing is, the youth weren't willing to work with anyone. They didn't trust adults. They had their reasons. So I worked with the elders, helped them develop the courage and confidence and develop and work on the skills so they could reach out to the youth and offer the teachings and offer the support they were meant to offer. That's what elders are for. And as the elders got stronger, the suicide crisis diminished. Not because I did anything, but because the elders did it. Traditionally, that is the role of an elder that was taken by the Indian school system. So if you are working with somebody, don't assume that that person as a self is who you focus on. I will not work with youth who are anxious or depressed without working with their parents, because I have never met an anxious or depressed youth who didn't have an anxious or depressed parent. I don't know if they exist. And so by working with the youth, you're actually generating disloyalty from the family if they start to see the world in a way that is less scary or less sad. The whole community becomes a resource. The last step is to shift from using government-sanctioned resources to community and cultural ones. A wellness resource is any source of self-worth or worthwhile life, and it could be a professional, but it could be a community member like an elder or a family member. It could be time on the land, in ceremony or in prayer, a positive activity or contributing, taking on a purposeful role. All of this promotes wellness, and when wellness goes up, problems go down. So the difference between a government-sanctioned and paid resource is quite simple. Everything where the government pays for it or sets the protocols about how it's allowed to be expressed in the community, that's a government-sanctioned paid resource. A community cultural resource is untouched by money or rules that come from the settler government. Put another way, every time we use a government-sanctioned or paid resource, we steal empowerment from the cultural traditional community by using paid experts. A terrible and familiar example of that are elders workers in communities. Elders workers are people who are being paid to look after older Indigenous people within a reserved community. Now what's happening is younger people are saying, why should I spend time with Auntie? I'm not being paid for it. And the elders are becoming isolated. And the workers with whom I often work say, oh, I love my job because I hear all these stories. And I think now someone outside of the family is learning the stories and the family isn't learning the stories. Culture's being lost because we professionalized elder care. We've turned it into a colonial intervention, even though the communities are now doing it themselves. The job of an elder worker properly is to support the family to re-engage with elders. That's what an elder's worker's job should be. When we take a look at the 4 branches of wellness and combine it with the map of the community, the self-community life world I showed you just a moment ago, you get this very scary looking slide. It's a tool that can be used to map out wellness resources. Now I should mention, problem resources are useful. A hospital is a problem resource, and we want the hospital to be there. A treatment center tends to be a problem resource, and a detox especially, we need that. So don't get me wrong, some people need problem resources. Nurses are very important, and so are doctors for physical injuries, among other things. What I'm getting at, though, is we too often use a problem resource when a wellness resource is more effective. And if it's a community-based wellness resource, it's even better. Using a map like this, you can work with an individual and identify their family resources, the people in the community, community agencies and programs, outside community resources, and how they can engage with nature and spirit in a way that will develop wellness in terms of all 4 elements of who they are: caring, connection, respectful empowerment, contributing purpose, and cultural and spiritual wisdom. But you could also work with a family and identify the individuals who support the family and each family member as a self and the community. So it can be used for a family intervention. Dealing with a community crisis, you can use the same map. So it becomes a tool that integrates all interventions. When I'm working in community, I'll often play this game where we'll identify what I would consider a colonization neutral, kind of like carbon neutral solution. We identify one community and cultural resource for every government sanctioned one. And just an example, for the, oh, I lost the slide, just forgive me here. For this person, here are a list of possible resources. A lawyer would be a government sanctioned resource, but a grandfather to teach him what it is to be a man would be a community resource. Now, this is where it gets important. If he goes to his grandfather, he gets caring connection. If he learns about what it is to be a man, there's empowerment of learning. If he helps his grandfather take large garbage bags full of bottles out of the house, that's purpose. And he receives teachings that are cultural. So he takes a step towards healing, this gentleman who we saw, who we're concerned about. However, the grandfather also heals, because now he has caring connection with his grandson. And this is a grandfather, this is based on a real person who was not very engaged in the community. He gets the empowerment of teaching his grandson a teaching he hadn't thought about for years. He has the purpose of being now a patriarch, being a teacher, and he's connecting to wisdom. So now the young man and the grandfather heals because they're working together. Every time you use a community-based resource, the community gets stronger because of it. Every time you use a government-sanctioned resource, the community says, oh, I guess we can't do it. We need to leave it to an outside expert. And that's what happens over and over. You might say that, okay, let's add a treatment center. Why not a healing center? But then a spiritual ceremony, whether it's a sweat or a church ceremony, you'll see that the man would get caring connection and the empowerment of the protocols of the ceremony. Everyone has a purpose to pray and contribute to ceremony. And there's culture and spiritual wisdom in both the sweat and the church, of course. And in every other ceremony there is, to be clear. But the church and the sweat get stronger because they want to remember for their connection. They have the empowerment of taking on the role and of being a helper in the community to somebody who needs their help. They have contributing purpose now by actually enhancing the wellness of the community in the young man we're describing. And finally, they are engaged in a cultural and spiritual wisdom and passing it on to others, which makes it richer. So now the sweat in the church becomes stronger. And if you follow the rhythm, whatever the issue is, going hunting with the uncle, you'll get the same thing. They're going to be, as the young man heals, so does the uncle. And everybody they share their kill with becomes healthier and healthier. So I'm just giving a very quick tour of what that might look like. The message here is that problems should be seen as opportunities and resources should be based on wellness opportunities. And there are always more wellness opportunity resources than problem resources. In a community, there may be a support group and maybe a counselor in a smaller community. However, if you ask about wellness resources, you've got grandparents, you've got nieces, you've got nephews, you've got uncles, you've got aunties, you've got youth who they might teach basketball to, you've got the land, you've got fishing, you've got prayer. You have so many wellness resources compared to problem resources. The more problems a person has, the more opportunities they have, which means that the more someone is struggling, the greater the resource base available. And finally, the more isolated the community, the further from an urban center, the more resources are available. For example, it turns out if you take a long gun and go deer hunting in Stanley Park, you could get arrested. That doesn't happen out in the isolated communities. Just to close, I want to offer a larger perspective of how this can be used. There's a community that has been offering many wellness promotion activities, and people aren't coming. Another isolated community with which I've worked. And so the solution was to ask each family to decide what is the problem they want to work on and turn that into an opportunity. So if it was a lack of communication, the opportunity would be better communication. And the activity was often land-based. So let's say it's going out on traditional territories, which they haven't gone for a long time, camped and fished and living for 4 days in their traditional camp together, where there's no access to Wi-Fi, so there's no games or anything like that. People are together. Then they identified how doing this would offer each of the 4 branches of wellness: caring, connection, of being together, the empowerment that everybody has a task to do, and they all get better and better at it the more they do the task. The purpose, those very tasks: protecting, providing, and teaching. And finally, they'd share stories of the family while they're out there. And they identified the resources that were required. And then the health promotion dollars for the year were divided up family by family, so the families could choose their wellness engagements as long as it met this criteria. And then they provided the funding or the resources that were necessary, and the families did it. And they found that in 3 months, 50% of the families in the community did something along these lines. 15 out of 30 families did something towards their wellness. They took charge of it. This was a post-colonial intervention. Some families did stuff around learning to eat better related to diabetes. Some did communication. Everyone chose something. The community can turn the problems into wellness and thus take caring of itself. The community reclaims its wellness by the community being the medicine. So I'm just going to invite you to ask yourself, what are some steps that you'll take to ensure that your approach is and continues to be post-colonial? Will you stop pathologizing or individualizing or medicalizing a problem that is actually not a medical individual problem? Will you engage the community more as the medicine so that it can reclaim its role, taking care of one another as it did forever until colonization? Will you ensure that people know who you are, that you are safe, and that's culturally safe as well as emotionally safe and physically safe, and useful in terms that are useful for the community so they claim their wellness? All of us are loving and caring people who come to a conference like this. And all of us have been developing our skills and are coming to this conference to develop skills and approaches or validate that which we know. And all of you are protectors, providers, and teachers. Allow yourself to be guided by the teachings of wellness. Listen to that voice of spirit so you can do your work in wisdom. It's something I grapple with all the time, and I admire all of you for the work you do. I'm honored to spend time with people who bring light to those who are in darkness. Protect your light, keep it strong, because you are needed. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thira. I have to say I'm really overwhelmed, and I've been writing notes down furiously as you've been speaking. And just a couple of points that I added were post-colonial vision of what the problem is, and it begins with strengths. The problem in the community doesn't come from the community. Such an important idea for people to acknowledge and look at and understand. With that, I'm trying to, one of the questions that I had is problems in the community not coming from the community, yet the community often bears the burden of them. So what is one specific action we can take as healthcare providers who work in a colonial system to better support a community?
That's a wonderful question. The work we do is to create the space where the community and its members can truly exist in wellness. So one thing I'll encourage to do is, and I this is just sort of a summary of what I was saying, is stop thinking about people as problems and identify what their goals are for wellness. Then explore how the community has the capacity to work towards achieving that goal. And our job is to fill in the spaces that are created by colonial violation. So we support the community as it does its job doing the work. And finally, always keep in mind that our job is to be ultimately irrelevant to the community, to support the community as it reclaims its traditional roles, so it no longer uses us as a first response, but only as a safety net. We're always going to be needed as a safety net because there are always cracks in every community. But we should not be the first response. The community is the first response.
Oh, thank you. Another question that we had that came up in the chat is actually, do you have a book?
I have a book draft, but I haven't published it. However,
Okay.
if you email me, I'm happy to send you manuals. And if you want to suffer through a 150-page book, it's got lots of stories and examples. I will be delighted to share it with you as long as you don't publish it first. So please, my email address is my name, Darien at my last name, thira.ca. I'd be delighted to share manuals on a variety of topics if you make contact with me.
And then just one last question for you. What does post-colonial wellness look like?
Am I wrong to make the assumption that you're Indigenous? You are Indigenous, yes? In which case it looks like you. It looks like every Indigenous person living well. You live your culture in a contemporary way. That's always been the way of communities. They adapt to their environment, but they maintain their values. They maintain their core vision of who they are. Your being involved in post-colonial work by being part of this conference tells me that you and everyone else who's Indigenous here is embodying wellness. It sounds trite, but it's the path that will lead each person to become an elder. Maybe not there yet, but it's the path to get there. And I'm so honored as a guest, as a settler, to be able to share what teachings I've been given to give back to those who are here to hear it today.
Again, thank you so much. Your wonderful, informative session. A lot to, we was looking at the comments, a lot of people are wanting the session to be longer and are really appreciative of you sharing your knowledge with us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I wish you all well.